He set a goal to grow his own business and personal brand and succeeded quite quickly. If this were a traditional education test, which I know is not the thing that gets him really excited, but he would have straight A's. And speaking of more modern education, he spends a lot of his time, especially in his newsletter, sharing tips that you won't necessarily learn in school when it comes to entrepreneurship. I watched him grow a brand before my eyes the last few years, and most importantly, I've seen him make a positive contribution to other people's goals, but also their entire lives. He takes pretty much everything that he learns about writing, online business, and, well, life, and shares all of it with his audience. We discussed all of these topics and more to help you achieve your own goals. Please welcome to interview 62, Taylin Simmonds. All right, Taylin, thank you so much for doing this with me today. I know that we're all really busy in the world of creatorship, solopreneurship, one-person businesses, business ownership, whatever it is in the entrepreneurial world. And they say time is money, so it really means the world that you take some time to do this with me today. So first off, thank you so much.
Yeah, no, of course, man. I'm always happy to hop on and chat. This is like one of the highlights of my day amongst all the busy emails and the writing and everything. Doing spaces and podcasts and just chatting is one of my favorite things to do. So thanks for having me on. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Of course, I was doing some preparing and really getting the sense that I don't want to take away from any of the other interviews, but I just had this feeling that this was going to be one of the best interviews we've done on the show. Hopefully it'll get that way each time, like going up a staircase, but I really felt that way doing some of the research and seeing how aligned you are with the principles that I stand for at JKL. And I'd love to ask you, put you on the spot a little bit. You've done some interviews. If this were to be the best interview you've ever done, why do you think that would be?
Well, that's a good question. I think that the free-flowing ones are the best. Ones that like don't feel choppy. Like choppy interviews always make me feel a little awkward when I feel like I have a lot to say, but we're just like moving on to other topics so quickly. But also keeping it as relevant as possible to the audience and like focusing on bringing a tons of value to them in whatever form that looks like. I think as long as we can combine those two things, we're gonna have a great time.
For sure. And like you said, if it's already the highlight of your day, then we're off to a good start. I appreciate what you said about the choppy interviews. For anybody listening who's maybe a new interviewer or thinking of going into it, I can really remember at the very beginning of this show having some choppy interviews if people were to listen back, because it was like, oh my God, I've got these 72 questions that I would love to ask an expert in this area. How can I get them all in? And I think anyone who listens to the show would recognize that in recent months and moving forward, it's going to be a pretty good balance of free flowing. And I think we've got that dialed in today for sure. One of the questions I used to always ask people, and it's like an annoying hack that some journalists will use when they don't actually know the person. They'll say, hey, who are you? What do you do? I want to cue this up for you because the reason I ask is I think that identity is so important to how we wake up in the morning and we want to take on the world, whether we're really quote unquote successful or we're looking up a mountain that we want to start on. How we see ourselves is important. And in the world of social media and online business, people define us. One tweet that you create that goes viral will have people with a certain perception of who you are and what you do. So I love to hear it from you as you feel today. If you were introducing yourself to, let's say, a business class in high school, and we gave you the mic, said, hey, who are you and what do you do? What would you say?
Well, you're putting me on the spot, making me realize I need to perfect my quote unquote elevator pitch here because I haven't thought about this in a while. I would say, Taylin Simmonds, I am a writer, creator, and we'll say online business owner. More recently, I've been focusing a lot on just creating quality content, sharing writing tips, and helping creators make good money online because that's what set me free. Is once I was able to apply my skills to the right vehicle in a high leverage position, write online and gain some level of influence, it completely changed my life. And I think that's possible for a lot of other people. And my current 5 year, we'll say, trajectory is just to help other creators do the same.
When you say set you free, that could be a pretty broad concept. I'm sure other people appreciate that for whatever it means to them. But what did that mean to you?
Mm, really good question. I like where this is going already. For me, in my early 20s, I'd say a majority of my 20s, I just like always felt like a loser, to be transparent, is I never really made that much money. I didn't have a lot of confidence. I was like overweight for like a lot of it. And it felt like mental chains, but also like environmental chains because you're stuck at like a 9 to 5. Like for me, I was a college teacher and I really enjoyed my job. It was genuinely really fun to teach people. Like I love educating. I wanted to be a teacher since I was a kid. But when you're in a position where you can't go up the company ladder anymore, you can't get a raise, and like your job has made that very apparent, but you also haven't gone and got a degree or developed the skills to like actually make good money, to like really break those chains, like mentally and location wise. Cause, as much as people say money doesn't buy happiness, I do think that, especially up until you make your first 100K, money has like a very massive impact on well being and how we view ourselves and how we can like live our lives. And going from like making 40K as a college teacher, being like, I can't go on vacations with my friends, I can't buy a house, I can't like support a family without like a dual income. Like those things for me were important. And I didn't have those things. I felt very like chained. And once I was able to apply my skills into a different vehicle, which is something I've become very bullish on, is just choosing the right vehicle and right means with like certain levels of potential. It like completely radically changed my life like very quickly within like 12 months. And that's what I mean by being set free. It was like, I have higher earning potential. I can travel the world. I can actually do the things I want to do. I can provide for a family. I can like, just talking to my girlfriend today and I was like, hey, like I actually am making enough. You can quit your job if you want in January when your contract's done. Like you don't have to like work if you don't want to. And like those types of things is what I mean by set free.
Yeah, that's a special moment. I didn't want to interrupt, but I wanted to yell like, let's go.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks.
Something along those lines. Getting in the right vehicle is something that I have a lot of empathy for. If I were to open up as well, I'd say that up until very, very, very extremely, extremely recently, I didn't know what I wanted that vehicle to be. And I've been trying to figure this out, at least as an adult, for 20 plus years. I too, as a younger kid, always wanted to, I don't know if formal teaching was the path, but at least coaching and advising younger people. I've always had this idea that when I am older or I know things, I want to be able to help the people kind of behind me, helping them up the ladder a little bit as well. And that's kind of been my philosophy, whether it's in sport or education. And for me, though, the crazy thing is I'm really still figuring it out. I know philosophically we're all figuring it out, but when it actually comes to that sort of vehicle, for me, this podcast was something I tried with like a million other things, YouTube, blogging, all these different mediums. And I'm so excited to be in this vehicle. When you reference the idea of making sure that you're in the right vehicle, what vehicle is that for you? And how did you go about shopping for it and figuring out that that was the right vehicle for you?
For me, the vehicle is like creator businesses and like writing online, like that whole kind of like we'll say sphere or that realm. Just I feel like I think that way. It just like really clicks with me. I really like it. Like thinking long term, thinking about emotional impact, like monetizing like digital products, high points of leverage, like all of those things just feel very aligned for me. But one tip that I'd give my younger self that I think people in their 20s really need to hear is everyone wants to just have almost like the silver bullet where they're like maybe 18 or 19 and someone comes along and is like, you're going to do this. And they're like, okay. And like they just go do it. But nowadays there's so much opportunity and there's so many things that you can do that it creates this like FOMO effect of like, well, what if this vehicle is better? Or what if I did this? Or what if I was happier here? But what I've found through my personal journey is the reality of what things are like is always vastly different than what we think it is. Like completely different. Like for the longest time, I wanted to be a music producer. And when I actually became a full-time music producer at the age of like 21, I actually didn't really like the day to day at all. I thought I would be happy and I really did not enjoy it. And I would tell myself, like, oh, when I get there, I will be happy. But when I got there, I was equally as unhappy as the progress of getting there, or like that process of getting there. So I think for people in their early 20s, like just make a list of things that you think you want to do and that might be aligned with you, and just start rigorously crossing them off. Just be like, okay, I think I want to go into sales. Go try sales for 1 month and honest to God reflect and be like, do you like it or not? And then just like drop it and just start like just get the options off the table. Like I didn't figure out my vehicle till I was 28, and I kind of stumbled upon it. It was more of an accident that I was just trying a bunch of different stuff and was just curious. And I'm like, oh, this is just working. And I ran with it and I really liked it. But before that, I did music, I did teaching, I did real estate investing. I worked retail, I did sales jobs. Like I tried a lot of different stuff before I landed on like more marketing, creator business type of things. And I think people need to have less FOMO around the idea of wasting time being like, I need to know what to do now. I don't want to waste time with the other vehicles. Like, no, crossing an option off as a hell no is not a waste of time, no matter like how long it takes to get there.
I really have a deep connection for everything that you're talking about. This takes me back to the first episode with Buster Shear talking about how we figure these things out. And it seems like each creator that I've worked with since has almost that very similar journey, right? For me, I made my handle that across socials at Just Tries because I wanted it to be at the very forefront of like, hey guys, I'm equally confused as the next person. I don't know what I want to do, but I'm going to continue to try different things. I'm going to document the process, share what I learn, and hopefully by doing that, it will model growth mindset and vulnerability and this idea of figuring it out without my having to go say it on a podcast in 10, 15 years from now. But it was just like pretty confusing for people in terms of a brand building thing. And I think, we'll talk about that idea of actually succeeding and growing in the creator economy and niche versus not. But just to stick with the idea of pivoting and kind of figuring these things out for a second. When you mentioned those different things you did from music, the odd jobs to teaching, and then where you are now, tell us a story or share some experience about transferable skills you learned in those times, like something that you learned that you still carry forward with you today.
Man, great. I was actually thinking about transferable skills when you mentioned like all the different stuff. So we are on the same wavelength right now. Man, there's so many. Like, I think the conflict resolution skills that apply to like any job, like anything soft skill related is definitely transferable. You could say like leadership mindset, conflict resolution, management, like that stuff just applies to so many different domains. And it is harder to monetize, but they're very transferable and like the backbone or the foundation of any job that you do. But I think the number one transferable skill that I would say, and it's maybe a little more abstract, is understanding systems thinking. Because music taught me that without knowing it was going to do that, is the idea that like things just aren't in isolation. Like in music, if you're playing a guitar, you can just like riff notes and it's totally fine. The second it's like, okay, we got to play it with drums, we have to play it with a vocal. Now they all have to be in the same key. They have to have similar like rhythms or rhythms that like sync up. And you start to understand how complex systems work, where you can't have like individual pieces just rogue doing their own thing. Like stuff all has to work together. Music taught me that more than anything, is like the number one transferable skill. And I look at business that way, where how does the product market fit work with the marketing, which works with the sales, which works with the fulfillment. In terms of like society, I think, hey, well, how do the individuals in a society, like if they give all these independent individuals, then you don't have like a cohesive society where the system is working. Like systems think applies to everything. And that would be the number one transferable skill that music taught me, was thinking in systems.
Sometimes I find on the show, it's important to remind myself that I'm creating content for the listener and we're having to work on an episode, but I often find myself when there's like a really thorough, well thought out answer being like, I wish I could go sit on a couch or go for a walk and think about that right now, which I'll have to do later instead. But the idea of systems thinking, for me, a lot of the transferable skills is design thinking as well, which I'm sure relates to music because something that's funny is, I mean, you wouldn't know this is not something I really share, I don't think, but I worked in a jail for youth and we would make a lot of music and some of them were pretty good hip hop artists. But what's so interesting is everyone has kind of their own process and their own way of designing things and creating in a music software and just, let's say, creating a song, let alone an album. There's so many different ways to kind of get there, but it all relates back to this idea of how do you personally design. When you mentioned soft skills, one of the things that I feel like is a challenge for people when they have so many different ideas is keeping organized, staying focused, the productivity idea of like, how do you stay productive when you are the type of person who has different interests and passions? So for you, what are ways that you managed to get really focused and dialed in on pursuing that vehicle?
I think it comes down to clarity, man. Like the older I get, and this is like an answer that's maybe too trite and people don't really see how important it is one of my first ever business mentors was so bullish on clarity. He's like, you need clarity to know where you're going to go. You need clarity to manage your team. You need clarity to build your business. You need clarity to like construct your life. And I was just like, yeah, I get it. Like know where I want to go. But it's, it's so much more beyond that. Like it's truly emotionally knowing and like feeling intuitively, this is like where I want to go and what I want to do. And I think that comes from alignment. Like I've never really thought it through this deeply, but like for me, when I think about writing an online creator business, I'm like, okay, what is like one solution that would like blanket solve a lot of problems? And for me, that was becoming a creator. Like, okay, it solves my money problem. It solves my family problem of like not being able to be a provider. If I go into high leverage, it also solves the problem of me like maybe not being able to spend as much time with my future kids as I would like. It solves my problem of location freedom. It solves my networking problem because I can attract like a higher network of people. It just solved like a majority of the problems I was having in life. So the clarity for me came from, okay, what are like the really like big emotional pain points of my life that like truly suck and are going to emotionally drive me to take massive action? And how can I do one thing that knocks as many of them off the list as humanly possible? And that's where my clarity came from.
We said it's going to be the best episode. I mean, I don't like to compete. I think that all art is about collaboration, but it's definitely a damn good episode because it's getting a little bit meta right now. The idea of clarity is something that I've always had a personal ability to help people with. And I get to do it in my day job because I mentioned the jail. I also go to addictions facilities, hospitals, a school for teen moms, group homes, that kind of thing. And I'll sit down with youth who really don't fit into the school system. They certainly aren't going to be a low paid employee. A lot of them have made a lot of money, like seen $1 million cash and stuff that I've never seen. And they're like 16. And so they're going to pursue entrepreneurship in some way, shape, or form, but they don't know what the heck they want to do. Back to what we were talking about, the idea of trying different things. Like that's the easy advice to say, hey, go try things. It's like, okay, I'm a 16-year-old kid or I'm a 14-year-old kid. Like, what should I try? Can you give me some tips on how to try it? So when I first started being in creatorship myself, I joined Stu McLaren's tribe, which teaches people how to start memberships. So I started a membership on helping people achieve clarity. I had no list, no audience. You can imagine how sales went because everyone told me the topic was too broad. And so I shut that down. It's one of the first, failures that I'm having learned from in the past. But I've always kept helping people find clarity of what they want to do. And I have pages of mind maps that I'll sit there with people and mostly in my day job and do this with them to get there. And the mental health shifts and the changes that people go through when they get that clarity, like it almost gives me chills thinking about some of those moments. So it's very much something clearly that I am a proponent of. You got clarity. And what was the next step when you started to realize that you got that clarity? And I appreciate that maybe you'll have to tell a story about how you finally got that clarity to join creatorship and start being a writer. But what was the first step to actually succeed as opposed to do what I did and just not succeed? Let's call it that.
Yeah. Um, man, I think it starts with faith. Like faith leads to the next step because basically what ended up happening was by total fluke happenstance, I got introduced to this guy who did very well on Twitter. He only had like 10,000 followers. And he's like, yeah, I made 300 grand off 10,000 followers on Twitter. And I was like, what? Like, I'd never posted on social media really before in my life. I wasn't really a social media guy at all. So when I tell people like I knew nothing about marketing and social media when I started 18 months ago, like, I'm not lying. Like, I knew zero. I'd never done it. And he's like, yeah, I made all this money off Twitter. I just posted for like 6 months, grew to 10K followers. And then I just launched an offer, made 300K. And I was like, that's a scam. Like, that's just not possible. But he had so much proof that I was like, okay, this actually, if this is true, it would solve all my problems. So the next step for me is to have faith that what is possible for others is also possible for you. Because especially before, if we're talking online creator businesses, I remember what it was like to not have made my first dollar online. And you have this like limiting belief that, maybe everyone else is scammers, like maybe this doesn't work. You haven't like verified it for yourself, which I think is really important. So for me, I had to have faith that, okay, if I just follow what these guys are telling me to do, who are ahead of me, it will work. Like, I think that's really important. Is like, who's ahead of you? Who has the result that you want? And like, what have they done? And does it align with your personality? I think is something people don't talk about because there's a lot of different ways to get that result. And some of them are more conducive for different personality types than others. So like for me, I didn't really like being super salesy and sending cold DMs and just like burning brand. I wanted to attract an audience and like truly help people and serve. And that's what makes me feel good, kind of selfishly, is I feel good helping others. And that's how I wanted to do it. And it wasn't until Dakota Robertson helped me close my first ghostwriting client for 3K. And like being in Canada, I watched $3,000 US hit my account and it was like, holy shit, this is possible. And then boom, I just ran with it. Like it was all faith up to that point. There's a lot of imposter syndrome, a lot of self-doubt that was very hard to combat on a day-to-day. It's a lot of mental weight when you're like trying to perform at a high level. But once you have that first win that truly makes you realize it's possible for you, that's when the weight gets like totally taken off and it's like, boom, you're gone. And I think the first step is to just have faith, find that mentor ahead of you and just be like, okay, if I follow this for 6 to 12 months consistently, it will work for me. Like it will, it has to. And like, you have to believe that.
I hope people really listen to this piece and even listen back to the last couple minutes of your response there, because it is the foundation that allows us to succeed. I started a free course, like a lead gen kind of course to help a friend out, Noah Merriby. He's a pretty successful online business person, life coach, that kind of stuff. And when we did it, he was like, dude, we need the first like 3 modules to be this part of mindset, this part of mindset, and this part of mindset. And to this day, we still kind of debate about that because I feel like a lot of people, when they're in that same boat that you mentioned, they don't believe yet. They want some action steps too, right? They want to know like, okay, that's fine. Like you said earlier, yeah, blah, blah, blah. Your mentor said clarity. And it's really hard because I have empathy for people going through that same thing, Think and Grow Rich. They're like, okay, bullshit. I just need to know, like, how do I create my first email? What are the tangible action steps that I can do? And I could tell stories for days about being in that situation where I knew nothing. So all I got done was being addicted to courses. Like, how can I learn more from the next person and really never taking action for myself? I'm happy that I can tell that story the same way that I'm happy that I never blew up on social media when I was like 18, because I don't think I would have been able to handle it. And I also wouldn't have been prepared to make the decisions that are in alignment with me. Like you said that you need to be in alignment, and you mentioned the cold DMs thing, for example. For me, a lot of, even though I took some of the courses, it's like, how to sell the 1997 coaching program on like this, and the sales and the funnels are all there. And it's like, it makes sense why their sales are so high. But for me, I was much more aligned with if people ask me for help and or I create smaller, low ticket workshops. For the longest time, coaches would tell me that that's like money blockers and stuff. And I'm like, nah, I just want to serve an audience that still hasn't figured it out yet. Like, I love what Justin Welsh's monetization strategy, for example, right? Like, I took one of his courses, $150. If you're trying to figure out if you want to be a YouTuber or a blogger or you want to be a writer, that's fine. Like, that's perfectly fine to, let's say, waste that. You're going to learn a lot from it anyways. But in terms of those kind of like tangible steps, I know they can really help people. You mentioned Dakota and how that was one of the first people that helped you on that journey. I've seen you tweet about the idea that it was luck being able to work with him the first time. I'd make the argument that it was networking or some transferable skill as well, but I don't know the story. So beyond that tweet, what did that look like for him to be able to help you close that first sale?
It was really that he gave me like the actual steps and was just like, just do this. Like it was very actionable. Like with you saying, away from soft skills and into like actionable stuff, I think soft skills are a good foundation that allows you to better implement like hard skills. And I had so much soft skills with everything I was doing. And he was just like, okay, man, like we're just going to take everything you're doing and we're just going to direct it in the right way. Like he's like, hey, show me that you can write good content. So I spent time, I crafted a bunch of threads and content. I sent it to him and he's like, okay, here's where you need to improve. Okay, cool. I rewrote it. And we did that a little bit. He gave me frameworks. He showed me like the back end. He goes, okay, cool. Now that I know you can write good stuff and my reputation won't be tarnished if I refer people to you, let me refer you a client. So that was how I solved like the lead gen problem, which is probably the biggest problem that a lot of creators run into when they're trying to monetize is, how do I get my first lead? And there's really like a couple ways to do it, like, cold DMs, referrals, or inbound attraction, like warm traffic. And for me, like he solved the referral problem. It was just like, I'll give you the business, but it's up to you to close the sales call and fulfill and to like do your job. He's like, I'll support you and you can call me and I'll help you, but you have to put in the work and like you have to direct your energy in that way. And that was really important because he gave me like an action plan. He also added a layer of accountability, but he also made me realize that it was within my own control and I had to be the one to do the work. Like he wasn't just like, oh yeah, like of course, like I'll just do it for you. Like, no, it was, I've given you everything, even the leads. If you can't do this, it is your own fault. And that level of accountability and responsibility combined with the actionable steps like worked quite well, was very like critical, I would say.
Perfect example of like a gradual release coach model. I can think back to being a personal trainer and having a very similar experience. I had someone who was moving town, had a ton of great clients, and he was like, here, they're all up for renewal. He timed it that way, so he was leaving anyways. He's like, you can work with them, but you have to close all those sales. And then I set sales records at that company because I think I did 40K in my first month, and that was on helping people with personal training. I feel like that is a very clear cut, like, hey, you're going to get this body. Hey, you're going to lose this weight. When it comes to the creator economy, I think people really struggle with making their offer tangible. So if you were coaching someone starting their first business, they're deciding, let's say, that college isn't for them and they want to give online business a try, what are some things that you would give them in terms of advice for coming up with what the heck they're selling in the first place?
Great question. I feel like whenever somebody gets a question like this, it's always the easiest just to be like, here's what I did and just like project my own path. So I think the first thing though would be to pick a vehicle that's like truly aligned, like a high income earning vehicle, which is usually in marketing and sales. Like if you want the quickest way to make like 10K, it would be through hard skills and it will be somewhere in the marketing and sales domain, most likely, unless you go into like e-com and maybe arbitrage and products, but I don't know that world as well, so I can't speak to it. I've just found like you go into high ticket selling and you can actually land a high ticket sales job, like you will make good money. If you go into marketing and you can do like really good SEO, and you can make like people money with SEO, like you will make good money. If you can ghostwrite and like drive leads with content, you will make good money. Like I find like the quickest way to make money is to make other people more money than they pay you. And those vehicles tend to be in marketing or sales. So I would just tell someone, do you want to be the person who's selling or do you want to be the person who's marketing? Like pick one of those, pick like a particular niche within one of those, but then go a step further and pick a transformation within the niche. And that's where a lot of people fall short is like you could say, okay, I'm going to be an email copywriter. It's like, okay, great. But like, what's the transformation that you're offering? Like, okay, I take emails and I increase open rates by 20%. Or I I help people take their skills and monetize them through email copywriting so they can make their first six figures. It's like, okay, cool. Like that's an actual transformation you're taking someone down. And I find that usually has to be there. It's hard skill in marketing or sales, plus like niched into some form of transformation. And then if you don't know how to deliver those results, start learning. Just like you don't even need to know right now, but like start like figuring out like who's doing it, what are they doing, like what skills do they have, what skills do I need, and just start like rigorously consuming quality content within that niche and just like trial and error and testing it. Like if you do that for like 1 to 2 years, like I just think there's such a low probability of failure. Like you will make good money as long as you're like competent and consistent.
One of the things that's been crazy is interviewing incredible creators and business owners such as yourself and having this moment of reflection where I'm like, if I could go back and do it over again, that is what I would do. I skipped a lot of those steps because, again, in my entrepreneurial world, I was a personal trainer, and the creator economy to me was, I didn't want to be like, hey, I can write a diet plan for you, I can tell you how to work out. I wanted my exercise to be for me, and that was my big part of like personal realization. So creator economy was completely new. I wanted it to be its own thing and super separate, but I didn't start freelancing or doing anything else in this world. And, having interviewed again, people like yourself or like the freelance fairy or people, I'm like, man, I definitely should have started editing podcasts for other people. That would have been a really smart way to start or whatever, right? Like, I'm a good writer. I just don't do it a lot, for example. So I could have got into email copywriting or something like you're sharing. But you mentioned if people don't know yet, then just learn. You, first of all, missed a great opportunity to say just keep learning. But in terms of how to learn, I think that's something that you've tweeted about a few times. You're really good at it. You were a teacher. When it comes to being able to take this esoteric concept like learning and break it down into helping people learn, whether it's specific to creator economy businesses or learning in general, what are some insights you'd share there?
What would be a few like quick tips on this? Like I found systems thinking to be really good for learning. So I like to understand the bigger the bigger picture of something and then break it down into first principles. So for example, like with learning ghostwriting, I remember asking myself like, okay, well, what even is ghostwriting? Okay, it's marketing. So what are like the foundational principles of marketing that just make up good marketing in general? That's like good hook writing. That's like market research. I always want to look for like the broader transferable principle. And then I think a lot of like knowledge is actually subtraction and not additive. So it's figuring out what not to do. Like this is like just so true with anything that I've ever learned is there's a million things you can do that will fail, but there is only a very small number of things that you need to do well to succeed. And like in music or in writing, it's like, hey, well, I could write anything. I could write about anything, but there's only a few topics that will get me like a quality audience that I want. I could do anything for the hook, but there's only a couple frameworks or like certain ways of doing it that will gather attention. I could write like my CTA any way I want, but if I want conversions, there are certain constraints. So I find a lot of it is figuring out what not to do, and that comes through iteration and trial and error more than anything. And then I had one other one. What's the other one I was going to say? Oh, I think the other one is having, you kind of alluded to it earlier, which is a growth mindset, but I would also tweak it a little bit to be like a sequential problem solving mindset, meaning like, okay, like a problem is happening. you don't want to like freeze. And I noticed this a lot with students when I was teaching is they would encounter a problem and I could almost tell in this moment that they were like coddled by their parents where they're like something's not working and their mom comes by and is like, "Oh my god, it's okay. Let me fix it for you. Let me help." And they don't know how to actually solve a problem step by step. And what I would slowly teach them is, okay, so you have a problem. What is like the highest probability solution of success that you know of right now? So for like a post, it's like, okay, the post flopped. Okay, what are like the few things that we could like problem solve this with that would be the highest probability of why this failed? Bad hook, lack of relevance. Okay, is it the hook or the relevance? Is it not relevant, or like is it distribution, is it reach? Like there's really only a handful of things, and you want to start with like what solution is the highest probability of success and then work your way down until you find the ones that actually are going to solve it. But like those three tips, if you can get really good at those three things, you can learn extremely fast, like faster than most people.
One of the worlds that I didn't really go into, but I tried in the sense of like learning myself because I thought I wanted to go into, was being a detective. Like that was a really interesting field for me. I still love it as like a concept. And I appreciate how you're sharing that because it reminds me kind of that same thing, right? Like starting to eliminate possibilities and even talking them aloud with other people on your team when you're eliminating possibilities. It goes all the way back to, like I said, giving me chills about helping people with a clarity call, for example, when they start to realize, yeah, no, not this because, and they're talking it out with you sort of back and forth. One of the other things that you shared that demonstrated your ability to learn, but also learn in public, was the idea that you started ghostwriting, thought it was the thing that was like the be all end all. Of course, this is good content, but I'm sure there's some truth behind it too, that you learned a new level by learning from the CEOs that you create for. What were some of the things that you learned from those CEOs or people that you were actually ghostwriting for that changed your mindset when it comes to business as well?
I, I would say the biggest one is like you got to have alignment of lifestyle with business and vision. Like there's maybe something in there I need to explore it a little bit, but like for example, ghostwriting was really good because all that I wanted was like I need location freedom and high earning potential. Okay, great, I got it, but I traded lifestyle for it. But I didn't know that in the beginning because I didn't know what the reality and the lifestyle of being a ghostwriter would be like. But when I scaled my agency way up, I was like, holy crap, I'm spending so much time managing my teams, like managing, like putting out client fires, like doing sales calls. Like I'm working more than I used to, and I'm making a lot more money, which is great, but I don't like this trade off. This lifestyle doesn't work for me because I also want to like have the freedom to spend more time with like my future wife and kids. Like that for me is just like extremely important. And I this is an idea I haven't explored like a whole lot, but I have this idea that beliefs are best in pairs, or things are best when like they're constrained by something else. So for example, it's like I want to make a crap ton of money, but I want to spend time with my family. So once you add like the constraint, it changes the vehicle. So for me, I'm like, okay, well, I could free up my lifestyle, but it would reduce my income. Is that the level of income that I want? No. I want to be able to make 1 to 3 million a year while still having this certain lifestyle. So now I'm like, okay, I'm eliminating possibilities. The only way that I can do this is to move into higher points of leverage with one to many like e-learning models, or move into like digital products at mass, because then I'm in a higher point of leverage. I can create once and like earn as long as I can continue to manage and like drive more leads. And once I started to figure out that that is what would actually get me the lifestyle I wanted, and that it would give me the other things I wanted too, that's when I started to change my mind. It's once I constrained the lifestyle with the earning, I was like, okay, I need to switch up like my game plan here because I'm in the wrong vehicle. Like it was the right vehicle then, it's the wrong vehicle now.
That's an incredible example of, again, learning in public, and something that I always appreciate. Typically, when people come on the show for a second time is when I would expect to learn how things have kind of changed from the first time around a couple of years ago, you know? And so I feel like that example of showcasing that shift in mindset, it's not to say that it won't change again in 2 years from now, is pretty special that you have that ability. It sounds like a newsletter edition. And if you already wrote it and I missed it, I apologize.
I need to still do my slow drip for this week. Maybe I'll write that.
Yeah, there you go. Um, too funny. Speaking of newsletters, the idea of being a good writer, I feel like is something that you would create a tremendous masterclass on if you were to go back to college and instead of music production this time, you went back just to teach writing. And so I'd love to hang out in that world for a little bit. I personally was given all these awards when I was in like the second grade, and I was published in the newspaper when I was in the third grade, and all these things for writing. And everyone was like, oh, you should be a writer when you're older. And I'm like, I don't even know what that means. Like when you say musician, I think it's pretty straightforward what someone like Eminem does when he creates a song and goes and does a concert. And I feel like when you say actor, it's quite straightforward. Oh, I've seen that person on this movie or in this TV show. When I was a kid, the only thing that I could think about when somebody said, oh, you should be a writer is children's books, novels, or nonfiction self-help books. And I was like, I don't want to do that. And I guess journalism would be thrown in there too. But on social media, it's a great hook to talk about our writing and being a writer. Because we're talking to a lot of beginners in business, what the heck does that even mean?
Yeah, that's a big question. I wish we had more time. We'll have to do a second one for sure. I'm really enjoying this. What does it mean to be a writer? I've never even thought about this before. I think maybe a lot of writing is just the ability to convey thoughts and sort thoughts. I think that might be what a lot of it is. Like there's different mediums, so you do have to be aware of that. Like if you're a copywriter, you're more about how do we frame thoughts persuasively? If you're a storyteller, how do we like frame a transformation persuasively? If you're like a business writer, how do we convey thoughts very clearly? Like it's really just like converting thoughts into different mediums. And like I think I heard somebody, maybe like Jordan Peterson, say this once. He's like, you're kind of like, it's like a portal where you're like giving someone else your thoughts, or like when you're reading a book, you're letting somebody else in your head as your inner dialogue. That really like slapped me across the face where I'm like, whoa, I got to be way more careful of what I read because I'm actually letting someone hijack my mind. So like when you really think about it that way, like when I'm writing, like somebody else is going to let me into their inner monologue, and like how do I want them to think? Like what thought process do I want them to go through? What images do I want them to have? Like the process of writing is really like controlling someone else's thinking, and like maybe not controlling, but guiding someone else's thinking would be a better way of saying it. So like how do you want to guide it? Like does it need to be more clear, persuasive, funny? Like what do you want them to feel? Because then like the thoughts will go down to emotions. That's probably how I would answer that and like think about it if we're getting to the deepest level of it.
Yeah, I appreciate that because, like I said, for me, it's like, oh, you could write a book. Okay, I don't want to be a writer. What's crazy now is I'm almost 40 years old, and I'm like, yeah, I still am a writer, and I want to be a writer, at least how I pretty much define it. Almost, I think every episode in the last while, anyways, I get DMs from creators afterwards being like, we definitely have to do a part two. I've thought of these things that I should have said, or I'd love to do this again next year, stuff like that. So we'll definitely have to do that because I would love to almost go through your ability to tell stories and your skill set when it comes to the idea of creating a newsletter that's not too spammy, but people actually are looking forward to it and pay attention, and all of these things that to me are really pretty modern. Like it's easy to say they've been around for a long time because we're in this world, but it's pretty recent that you see really highly skilled writers be able to share content for free, still grow their audience, grow their lists without being spammy and kind of tricking people, and just really building an awesome business around the idea of writing. So going into that in a really long form will be fun. That said, we only have so much time till we have to wrap. If you were to give some tips or tricks for people who aren't strong at writing yet, or they think they suck and they don't publish because they don't know how to write, or even resources, I guess, where would you point people?
I think the book, I think it's called On Writing by William. Ziegler or something like that. I can never remember the author, but it's a really good like foundational principles book. Like I read it even as I didn't read it till I already was like writing a lot and I had a lot of experience as a writer. But even so, like I was like, damn, this is so concise and so foundational and so good. It's just like I think that is like the one book that you could read that would make you like a better writer. But I would also say that the quality of your writing does come down to the quality of your thinking. Like you when you start writing, you really start to realize how much thinking is extremely inefficient and we're just like so bad at it. Like we think in leaps and not steps where you're just like, or you intuitively know things, but you've never broken them down. And once you start to write it, it really challenges you to be like, okay, how the heck do it? Wait, like what steps do I do here? And like, how do I move them from like here to here? And like, wait, how would I tell somebody to do this? Like, I just know how to do it, but how would I actually tell them? So it's a combination of knowing like basic writing principles, which you can get from that book, but also learning how to think more in steps and think more like A, B, C, D, E, and break things down and understand them a little bit deeper. If you can do those two things, I think you can get pretty good at writing pretty quick.
And when it comes to the ability to be a good storyteller, again, we'll have the 60-minute version when we're working on this in the future. But where do you see people make mistakes when it comes to telling stories?
There's a couple big ones. Most of the good stories are actually quite mundane when you think about it. It's stories. You think about what their job is. It's to convey like emotion and to mirror like the human experience, or like make somebody feel something. And I love this quote from Storyworthy, and I'm paraphrasing it, but he's like, "No one cares about the best vacation you've ever been on, but people do care about like that moment when you watch your kids go off to school for the first time, because it like pulls on an emotional heartstring." So I think there's a lot of like mundane moments that people are like, my life's not interesting. Like I don't really have interesting stories to tell. It's like, dude, if you're a human and you're living, like you have interesting stories to tell, like regardless of where you're at. You just need to have like a clear start end, and it needs to be based on a transformation. That'd be like tip number two is without a transformation, I would say you don't really have a story. And without a desired transformation, you don't have a very good story. So it's the relevance, especially if you're writing online, relevance is like completely key. Like I heard this one from Kieran Drew. He says, you can tell stories that are less relevant to your audience, but make them like really short because no one's going to read them for that long. So the more relevant, the better. And then the final one, which is harder to do with words, but if you're telling a story, is you actually want to embody the emotion of the story while you're telling it. And I'd say this gets a little into like acting. Like if I'm like telling a story, like was a good example. Stories that I got a lot of feedback from are when I did ayahuasca, and I did a Twitter space with some friends, and we talked about our experiences, and I was like almost acting out like what the experience was like, and like I was raising my tone of voice and I was like feeling it in my body even though I was just on a Twitter space, and people were like, oh my god, like I could just feel your story. It's like, yeah, because I can feel it. Like if you can feel it, it's real. So like relive it when you tell the story. Like don't just like use your words, like actually relive it with your body, and people will feel that a lot more than your words, and that's when your stories have impact.
Yeah, I get that a lot at the front of a classroom or in person as well. And you're right, it's a little bit harder, I guess, to translate to the written word. When you said the idea of relevance, it really makes me think of one of those words that really bothers people, and it's the idea of niche versus not niche. A lot of the people listening, their goal, hopefully after they listen to this, is to go start writing on Twitter, LinkedIn, wherever else they want to write, start building an audience, just learn from failure. But when it comes to that, what insights do you give people as far as like how niche should I go, or should I worry about telling stories that are off topic?
Well, in the beginning, like I just don't think there's anything wrong with just testing and like just trying stuff a lot. But if I was trying to help somebody niche, it really comes down to clarity again, like you said. Like it's all about goals. Like, okay, do you need to monetize as fast as humanly possible? We got to niche into a hard skill with a transformation. Do you want to just grow influence as fast as possible? Okay, we got to go into a broad market with a lot of people. That's where you can do like mindset or self care or something, and you can grow relatively fast by hitting like broader problems, but they're a lot harder to monetize because people are willing to pay less money for those solutions typically, and they're less like quantifiable. So like that would be the first thing is like, okay, what are your goals? Is it like large scale, quick influence, or is it just let's make as much money as quickly as possible? And then two, I think like niches can be multi-dimensional. I think people like really forget about that. They see niches as like it's one thing, but I've always looked at a niche as a combination of pillars. Like even for me, it's like yes, my niche is like technically writing, and I help people build like personal brandings that would or personal brands that would be the transformation. But I talk about learning, I talk about life lessons and philosophy because there's soft skills that underpin the hard skills. So you can talk about those. There's your personal experiences with said soft skills and hard skills. There's like the new things you're learning that are like being integrated into it. So like writing principles you learn maybe from stoicism. Like there's just if you get creative, a niche can be very multi-dimensional. So it doesn't have to be this like boxed in thing where you're feeling all claustrophobic and you're like, oh, I can only like post about stoicism. It's like you could have like three or four pillars that all relate. And as long as you're like relating it to the audience in the right way, you can talk about those.
That's awesome. It's a great mic drop moment. I feel like it gives people some homework to do towards the end of the episode. I do have a few theme questions that I just like to rapid fire with people because it ties a through line of all the episodes together. Before I drop those on you, is there any last thoughts? I know we got to wrap pretty soon, but any last things on these topics that you'd hate to leave not mentioning, or are you feeling complete?
The only thing I haven't mentioned is when you said you were almost 40, I was like, damn, dude, you look younger than me. Like, what the heck are you doing? Like, I was like, what is your routine like? Because this is like, what skincare products do you use? Like, I'm just like completely baffled. I'm like, I thought you were my age, man, and you look younger than me. So that's crazy. I'm just mad props to you. You either got good genetics or you have like some damn good habits.
Definitely genetics. A month ago, I had really long hair, and I probably looked even younger for sure. Yeah, you know what though, the philosophy of life and stuff is pretty crazy because, you know, what was it, Aaliyah? Age is just a number. I mean, it's like again, this is another thing I don't share a lot, but my brothers passed away at 32 and 34 years old, and so I'm 30, going on 39. Feeling hella grateful for that number. I don't feel young, but yeah, I don't know. I don't think you certainly don't look older than me. I do use Rocky Mountain soap lotion though, so it's a quick shout out to them. If this ever were to be sponsored, maybe that's what it is. Ah, man, too good. All right, so rapid fire questions is one thing that you yourself are learning right now.
I would say how to cope with stress and mental weight in healthier ways as I take on more responsibility.
Good for you. If you ever want to just be chatting in the DMs or anything, I'm always here because I know when it comes to our journeys, it can be nice just to have people without a reason to create together or something like that, So reach out anytime.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, of course. And if you were to leave one piece of advice, super wise dude, but if you could only leave one piece of advice for the next generation, your future kids, what would that piece of advice be?
Culture is wrong. I'll try to sum that one up super quickly. Is like, I just feel like culture is just whatever's emotionally popular. And sometimes it's very useful and conducive to certain groups of people, but it always trades other groups of people. And regardless of the time you're born, I think you should just look at it as like, this is just currently like what's popular in consciousness. If it doesn't align with you, like throw it away, go and do your own thing. That's totally fine. You don't have to like abide by what's popular in society. I think that'd be the number one thing.
Love it. Do you. I give you the mic. You're hosting a podcast, but you can only ask me one question. What is a question that you ask me?
Well, I would ask you like, what are like the healthiest ways that you find to cope with stress? But that's maybe because that's my current problem, and I'm so like problem focused. I'm like, what is one way to like drastically reduce my mental weight?
That's a powerful one. You know what's crazy is I had this thought before we hopped on, and I was like, I don't ask selfish questions. Like I'm always thinking of my listener and my audience and being like, okay, what helps them? And then I'm trying to be that channel, that conduit in between. But I had this thought because I'm about to do a solo episode after this and I didn't have a topic yet. And I was like, I was going to ask you, okay, you're really smart when it comes to content creation, idea generation. What's an idea for a solo episode? So instead of really answering it, I'm going to cop out and say that's the solo episode I'll make. Because I think that's a good one. But it's huge, and I know that naturally we're going to have to run instead of going into the depth that I would like to. Aside from clarity, because you said it earlier, I feel like the productivity stuff is really powerful. The scheduling, the 168 hours, Lauren Vanderkam, like her work. But that can be too overkill as well. So I feel like the other piece is just really being able to have little hacks to tune into the power of now. Because that's a great book that doesn't have a lot of like tangible stuff, but figuring out your own way through trial and error to make sure that you're 100% present on this interview, 100% present when you're hanging out with your friends at the beach, and then 100% present when you're on a sales call is, I feel like when you actually tune into the power of now, all that stuff goes away. And it's easier said than done. I've struggled with like acute anxiety my whole life. So sometimes I'm in a better place with it. But those are 3 things that come to mind really quickly.
Amazing. The power of now one resonates a lot. I think that's a more helpful tip than maybe it seems.
Yes, but a very complex one. I see people share it on their Instagram stories and stuff, and I'll DM them. I'll be like, make sure you read that throughout the course of the rest of your life. A lot of books I read, it's like I'll crush them in half a day, never touch it again. I'm like, that book, you're better off reading 1 sentence every month for the rest of your life because it's heavy. But if you can use it and apply it, then it's massive. The final thing before we truly drop the mic is where and why could people go support your work?
Where? Twitter and LinkedIn these days at Taylin Simmonds, newsletter, The Digital Drip. Why? If you want to enter the creator economy before, we'll say, it gets more saturated as more and more people are looking at it as a viable income source and like a career vehicle, here to help you guys achieve that as soon as possible. So if that's what you want, is like to be a writer, content creator, not really sure where to start, not sure what niche to pick, feel like you have a lot of imposter syndrome, hit me up. Let's chat about it.
Awesome. That's beautiful. I have a massive wait list for this show, but whenever there's really, really good episodes like this, I feel like we definitely have to make the time in the future to hop back on, and I look forward to that. Thank you so much for taking the time to do episode 1 today.
Yeah, dude, likewise, man. Already looking forward to episode 2. This was one of my favorites so far, so you've delivered on your promise.
It was a collaborative idea, not a promise.
True.
Appreciate you. You have a good rest of your day, and we'll be in touch.
Thanks. You too, man. Peace.
JKL listeners, thank you so much for being here. We're having a really good time with these interviews. I hope to have more and more. If you know anyone that you would like to see on the show, please DM me, send me an email. Just let us know, because interviewing guests that you are really appreciative of learning from is what this is all about. And it would mean the world if you pass the show along to friends or family that you think might also enjoy and benefit from an episode. Thank you to our guest today, Taylin. He's one of those people that share the complete blueprint to creator success, which makes this whole process kind of like building your own brand and business, like you were building a Lego kit or something. You could really just simply follow along. And in reality, with online business, there are a ton of shady characters, but Taylin is a great leader. Like I said, we love getting your DMs or comments about the show. Any input is helpful. Guests, topics, don't be shy. Just let us know. Until the next episode, all the best. And remember, just keep learning.